right, we're live.
Okay, let's give a couple of seconds for people to come in. Okay, well, I want to welcome everyone to tonight's presentation of some of our plans for redevelopment of our downtown. This meeting, just so you know, is being recorded, so there will be an open public discussion or question period later on. And I want you to know that you will be recorded as we are. So redevelopment has been one of our top priorities of the mayor and council for the last, well, since I've been mayor. And unfortunately or unfortunately for most of the time that we've been talking about this, a good deal of the redevelopment in town was occurring on the outskirts of the municipality. Now we have a chance to really do what we had hoped and planned for our downtown along our Main Street area. We need to do this in order for our municipality to be economically vibrant and viable for the future. What we have learned from some of the development that has gone on is that people want to live in Highland Park. What we also have learned is that two major demographic areas that have been growing parts of our population here, the baby boomers and the millennials, both groups want to live in a downtown area. They want to be able to walk downstairs, have a cup of coffee, go into the city and just walk across the bridge to the train. Our downtown is perfect for what these two major demographic groups are looking for. And we have an opportunity now to capitalize on the growth of downtowns throughout the country. So at this point, I want to turn the meeting over to Councilman Hale, who is the council's chair of economic development. And Matt, take it over.
Thank you, Mayor. So I wanted to thank everybody for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to sort of set the table a little bit with some of the broad picture guidelines or frameworks that the council and the mayor have been doing our best to work with as this plan moves itself forward. And so I'll begin that one of the most important things for us is the idea that whatever development happens downtown, it's consistent with the master plan. There was a great deal of energy, both in developing and updating the master plan, but certainly a lot of community involvement in the master plan. And so we really wanted to make sure that whatever we were proposing or how we were proposing it was consistent with the master plan. And I think what you're going to see tonight will certainly do that. As the mayor said, the number one priority from the council's perspective and the mayor's perspective is we need to get people downtown. We need to get as many people as possible to spend most of their time on Raritan Avenue. That's living on Raritan Avenue, that's shopping on Raritan Avenue, that's eating on Raritan Avenue. And so the plans that you're going to see tonight, really the fundamental goal is to get people to our downtown. And as the mayor said, that's been a long goal for both her and for the council to really do all we can to have Highland Park be a downtown destination. I do want to frame some other broad picture items in the ways that we had the professionals, the marching orders that we tried to give the professionals. One of them is very clearly don't be Metuchen. And what I mean by that is Metuchen development has been phenomenal for them, right? But it is not Highland Park. One of the things that we think is important is that Highland Park remain a unique place and somewhat of a quirky and a different place. That's sort of our calling card. And so we have some design issues and ways that we would like to sort of encourage this to go so that we retain that sort of independent character of Highland Park. A lot of things like the way we hope buildings will look, the way that we hope art will be a big fundamental part of this. So that's important. Another thing that I think, and I wanted to say this early and say this often, is that we're very, very clear that affordable housing is not an optional element to this. Affordable housing is a value to Highland Park, and it's a value that we take very, very seriously. And so the idea that there's a lot of different ways to meet that, of course, but we would like to meet and exceed all of our affordable housing obligations with all of these. And I think that's a fundamental value proposition that we've made for this development. Then we also, I think, very much want to make sure that these development plans are in line with us. What I like to say is walking the walk. Highland Park has always been a walkable community. It's one, when we were doing the master plan, it was one of the #1 things that people said, that we want to retain that walking quality to Highland Park. And so you'll see plans tonight for ways of encouraging that, including I think a pretty exciting sort of festival street, which is another sort of value that you're going to see. The idea of public space being an important part of all development, and how you bring public space together so that people will come together and congregate. And, you know, we all hope that that's going to be a lot more feasible when COVID is over. But we need to plan for that, and so that there is a fundamentally important central public space as a part of this. We've talked again, and this is down the road, of walking the walk when we talk about things like making bike friendly and scooter friendly and environmentally friendly. All of those are things that we're encouraging, I think, with this development. Certainly from an environmental perspective, the density issues of bringing more density is an environmental plus. And so again, that's sort of a big picture item, big framework that we're looking for. Overall, in order for this to work, we have to be flexible, we have to be creative, and we have to have the courage to sort of try some new things. And I think that this plan is a fantastic roadmap with how we're going to really, really reshape what happens in downtown, and really reshape Highland Park along those guidelines. Again, you know, we can't do a downtown redevelopment that forgets who we are. And so this downtown redevelopment is not going to be just luxury houses. It's not going to be Metuchen. It's not going to be a car-centric area. This is going to be a Highland Park downtown redevelopment, filled with art, filled with people, filled with fun. That's sort of what we're hoping, and that's what we hope this process has come about. So those are the frameworks that we gave the professionals. And so I'm going to turn it over to the professional of professionals right now, our borough administrator, Terry Jover. And Terry's been phenomenal. She has a background in development. She is wonderful, not only at planning, but she's also wonderful at listening. And I think that's the last part of, I just wanted to go over again, is that, you know, this is a conversation. We think this is a fantastic idea. We're listening. This is one of 3 meetings this week. There'll be many, many more in the future as this rolls itself out and as it develops. And so we want to have a conversation with all of the stakeholders involved with this. And so that's it. I think for me, I do want to say before I turn it over to Terry that I have 3 meetings at 7 o'clock tonight for the borough. So if I disappear, it's not that I'm not listening. I'm going to go back to the recording to hear all of the comments for everybody. But until I can figure out how to be 3 places at once, I'm going to try and go over to Safe Walking as another one that will be on tonight. But with that, let me turn it over to Terry, and she's going to talk a little bit about the process moving forward, and we'll go from there. Terry?
Hi, good evening. Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Matt, for the nice intro. I'm going to just pull up onto my screens just to keep me focused and quick, because we want to get to the real meat while everybody's here, is what are some of the ideas we're kicking around. So really quickly, I'm going to share. Can you see my big stakeholder meeting #1 on the screen? I think we've covered that this is stakeholder meeting #1 and today's date. And so thank you, Mayor and Councilman Hale. What I'd like to talk briefly about, but before I get into the meat on the format and the process that we're in, and I'll talk a little more about that, is just give you a better feel for what tonight is all about. And this is the same format we'll be using for the subsequent stakeholder meetings this week. Following my overview of the process, we'll have a quick a presentation from our planning team, which is constituted by Jim Constantine and Chris Cosenza from Looney Ricks Kiss, or LRK, and they're our borough planner. I should also introduce, while I'm here, our special counsel for redevelopment, Joe Bauman, is here in case some questions come up on a more technical end of things. So he's available to us as well during the public comment. But then we'll, like the mayor mentioned, we will be ending up with public comment, which is what we hope to do is focus on in the materials that were distributed, what we're calling tracks A and B, because that's what this stakeholder group were proximate to. However, if you have comments on the overall conceptual stuff that we present, we'll welcome that. And we're going to limit that, at least initially, to 3 minutes a person until we can make sure everybody has a chance to speak. It doesn't look like we're overrun by attendees at the moment, so we should be able to accommodate plenty of public comment with our time frame. But we do want to try to stop and respect everybody's time by 8 o'clock. So I just want to make sure we're aware of that. But briefly, the mayor and Councilman Hale mentioned we're in a process, and Matt did a great job of explaining that we're really rooted in the master plan re-exam and the land use plan element that were developed in 2019 and adopted in 2019. Because that's really, we did a lot of work around downtown development, soliciting input, et cetera, and we didn't want to lose that, and we wanted to continue that momentum to this process. Our consultants, Jim and Chris, will show maps and things to orient everybody shortly, so I'm not going to go into that. But a big component, another foundation, is public engagement. These meetings we're holding this week, and if any of you want to come again and again, you're more than welcome. You have, probably most of you have my email by this time, but I've also listed it on the screen here. You're welcome to attend the other ones. Again, this is AB night, the next night would be C night, and then D night on Wednesday. However, all are welcome. But then we're also looking toward a public meeting on November 17th at 7 o'clock. That's our regularly scheduled council redevelopment meeting. However, we're going to use the time to present what we hope will be a draft plan based on the input that we've received, and that will be an opportunity for you to come back and see what we've done. And we are tracking, we have a fairly aggressive timetable to have a second public meeting on December 10th, which is actually a regularly scheduled planning board meeting. So some of this is tentative based on what other business may be before the board. So I should have written tentative next to that one. But the idea would be to refer the plan to the planning board for comment, and at that meeting, offer a presentation to the planning board and to the public to show the product in its most final form at that point. And then followed up by December 15, a public hearing and adoption, which is at a regularly scheduled council meeting. And I indicated on an ongoing basis, my email there, tjover@hpboro.com. We'd welcome input, questions. If I can't answer it, I will get you answers, or I'll provide you with what information I can provide you as we go along. And I'd welcome any comments on an ongoing basis via email, and I'll certainly direct that to the governing body and to our professionals as we move through. So there's multiple opportunities to touch in with us as we go along, and we'll adjust the schedule if needed based on, you know, how we perceive the process is going. But one other really kind of important point I'd like to make is this doesn't end with the adoption of a plan, especially when we're looking at the borough controlled properties that are included in this plan, that this ultimately will be a plan. We will be looking to solicit proposals from qualified developers. We'd have to pull together a request for proposals, which would require us to be probably a little more specific about what we would be looking for. And that would be done through a public process. We would have, you know, the governing body would have to approve that, and there would be a scope of kind of a solicitation of interest that would reflect what we're trying to accomplish with this plan once it's adopted. So there's going to be more process beyond just the plan, but the plan is going to set and create an envelope for us to work within. So it should speak to the values and the goals that we want to achieve. And so that's why we want to hear from as many of you as we can to make sure we can incorporate as much of that as possible within whatever constraints we were operating in. So with that, I don't want to hold up the fun part, which I think is the fun part, which is the presentation that Jim and Chris have put together. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that they might share their screens. And they're going to walk us through some initial, and I should say these are preliminary concepts, and to get the conversation going based in that master plan. And with that, Jim, you can introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Jim Constantine from LRK, Borough Planner, and with me is Chris Cosenza, who also assisting on all matters of Highland Park planning. First of all, we're incredibly excited that in less than a year after the adoption of the master plan, we are to the point of actually looking at implementing the master plan, which has a vision for the downtown to really leverage reinvestment, revitalization, infill, and redevelopment, and try to expand the opportunities for mixed-use development that includes upper floor housing to increase the customer base that supports a walkable, vibrant, thriving downtown, and that recognizes that we have challenges in an e-commerce era. Also, a year ago, we couldn't anticipate we'd have challenges in a post-COVID era, which hopefully we will begin to move into. So we included some of the downtown strategies on the right that I'll mention as we go in, and the images you're looking at were all from last year's master plan adopted in December. So we'll sort of jump off what everybody's already said, terrific introductions to the topic, and look at what the 4 tracks are, the areas we're looking at tonight. We included these in the mailer that you received, or the emailer that you may have received. And council has basically asked us, working with Joe Bauman, the redevelopment attorney, to move forward and try to make more concrete some redevelopment and infill plans for the sites that we're seeing here. And we'd like to do is actually do a little walk. Tract A and B are the focus of tonight's meeting on the left. But let's just start by taking a stroll up the avenue, and you can see Tract A on the left, Tract B, and Tract A you see has 2 shades to it because it includes everything from the gun and boat and 2 vacant lots behind it to down to the Bergen Auto site. Tract C, where the farmer's market is today, and up at Tract D, which is at North 3rd and Denison Street, which we'll end on. So we're going to drop down to ground level for a stroll or a bike ride up the avenue. So now we're approaching Tract A is on our left, Tract D is on our right, but as we move forward to Tract A on the left, the vision is to really custom tailor infill development, utilizing site-specific plans and concepts. And here you see a new building that's 4 stories and then steps back to 5. You can see some residents on the upper floor there. The building has a slight tower element to it and uses some signage to try to really act as a gateway approaching the downtown. And it's sort of unique because that's something that's obviously not there today. There's some ground floor commercial space in this building, but it's really mainly residential or potentially some other use similar to that really tries to increase the customer base and generate activities that will increase the vibrancy of the existing retail and allow in addition to retention, some attraction of additional retail. Complementing that across the street on what we refer to as Tract B is another proposal for what's known as 130, 134 Raritan Avenue, which you can see again at that same height and scale. There's a little resident terrace overlooking the avenue and providing places where the residents of these buildings can also look at the downtown skyline of New Brunswick. But more importantly, as I like to say, New Brunswick can see Highland Park, and you see from this the sense of arriving through these almost sort of bookends, complementing both sides of the street, creating an immersive experience, a sense of arriving in the downtown that is perhaps not as strong today. Next, if we sort of slide up the avenue on our little bike ride or stroll, we approach the site in the distance where the farmers market is held today. Track C. And what's proposed there, again, is, and this is a borough-owned tract in its entirety, is for infill, scale of a 5-story building. It's only 4 at Raritan, then steps back. And if we zoom in just a little bit, you can see that there's a courtyard between 2 wings that front out onto Raritan, and that courtyard actually provides a passage all the way back through the building and past the church, and where there's some access today, and connects to the rear on foot. So it's really a very pedestrian-oriented concept. I should also mention one other thing. There is a small amount of retail space on that right wing next to the bakery, and one of the goals of the master plan was to try to expand the variety of active ground floor uses. And so we suggest in the master plan looking for more makerspace uses, which actually what the bakery is, where people actually make things. It's not just traditional retail. And I think, as many of you may be following, the world events, retail and restaurants will face some challenge. And so the lobby would be on that far wing of the building, on the other side of the courtyard facing the street, but that's active space. The lobby of an apartment building can be designed almost like a hotel lobby with some active space, maybe some co-working space, some common areas, maybe even a fitness room is placed along the street. That creates, again, active street front uses, but doesn't create a lot of new retail space that challenges us trying to, maintain vibrancy and increase vibrancy of the existing. So now as we move up the avenue further, we're going to approach there you can just see the site of where that fit in. We approach the intersection of North 3rd, North and South, really, because this vision is to really identify this as sort of the center of downtown, which it's not clear exactly which street it is. There's also a slightly wider right-of-way, which we'll show you in a second. And so the building on the left is a new building that takes the place of what was last the Blue Horse. And we do envision a very active ground floor commercial use there. There's some other infill buildings you can see on the far right, fronting on Raritan, multi-level parking structure at the rear. But the most important thing about this is it creates the public gathering space that was called for in the master plan, like a town square. In this case, it's the Festival Street that Councilman Hale referred to earlier, that you can see here. And we just took a little artistic license and said, what happens if you could have the best pre-game and post-game football parties, not so much for undergraduates, really to attract that alumni group that comes back, that we want to dine in, restaurants and take other retail activities in. Perhaps there's a large digital screen and some other flexible gathering space. The farmers market could also occur here, along with other programmed special events and other informal events as well. If we could move forward and just show you, that's what's there today. So the first thing is the Provident Bank at the opposite corner, and the other 3 businesses, if we can go to a series of maps right now, would remain as is. There are a couple of spaces behind the bank that would become absorbed into the future multi-level parking structure, which I'll talk about in a second. And if we go forward, the next piece of this is really providing a plaza, this Festival Street on North 3rd, but potentially continuing across to that portion of South Third that's been closed today, that's been acting as effectively a pop-up, kind of a test festival street with the picnic tables and the umbrellas and people enjoying it. So the idea is that special events like the farmers market could even span both sides of the street and create sort of an immersive experience. Overhead lighting that would also become part of the entire dynamic there as well. Next, if we go forward and show you, there's a new building at the corner. We think that's important to be a landmark of this new public space. And then lastly, we fill in on the Denison Street lot with a multi-level parking structure. The key to this, which is also called for in our master plan, is to really become a single location that we could create cooperative shared parking for all of the redevelopment and infill that we've shown you on all the sites. So everybody basically parks once at one location. That creates more walking and activation back and forth to tracks A and B, which we're going to talk about in a moment, track C, which we just spoke about, and also what would happen here on track D, which will advance and show you the additional redevelopment, both fronting on Raritan Avenue with a mixed-use building, as well as onto Denison Street, which would really be a residential liner, which acts to create a residential face on the side of the multi-level parking structure. So if we could go back or go forward, Chris, and look at it from the Denison Street side. So here we are on North 3rd. We're going to slide up to the corner. There's an exposed parking lot there today. It's been there for decades. And there is that liner building. That's a brick building, maybe a work-live unit at the ground floor, some upper floor apartments. We'll show you the view of the rest of it. There would be the multi-level parking structure. We have scaled this, so we believe the buildings will be same or slightly larger than the multi-level parking structure, which could have some small amount of public parking on the ground floor, but effectively it's resident parking for all of the infill and redevelopment that we've shown. Next, if we could just slide up Denison Street, looking from this direction, again, you see that existing parking lot in the distance. And so what's proposed is to create a liner of residential scale buildings with verandas and balconies fronting onto Denison Street that really pick up on the scale and the character of the existing residential neighborhood, take away the sort of blighted view of an unscreened parking lot, and but is much more residential neighborhood in character at this location. So I think we're now going to go back to tracks A and B, which are shown on the left of the mailer that you received, we posted, and return first to track A, which is on the left, which envisions building fronting on the street, basically where the Rutgers Gun and Boat is. So basically we're infilling on this site between the new building that you see on the right, former International Market, which is coming along nicely, and the Classic Cleaners in between. Should mention one other thing about the geography here. Denison Street at the rear, which you see pictured in the bottom photo, is basically a story lower than Raritan Avenue. And so that also creates some opportunities to basically step back and down at the rear of the site. We could go forward. So in red and the right is what you see we identify as tract A that we've been discussing. And in orange are potential other properties that could be assembled and added in to the mix. The borough is the owner of the far left property labeled Bergen Auto, and should also note that that's next to the existing pedestrian walkway that steps down that flight or story to Denison Street from Raritan. We could go forward. So this is what we were showing in that visualization for proposed mixed-use building on the Gun and Boat site, including the 2 vacant lots behind it on Denison, which is an area that we have declared an area in need of redevelopment. You see the classic cleaners in gray to the left, and then the existing or the new building that's being constructed to the right. So it's classic infill in that it fits in between there. You see the sort of tower element we've identified on the right side of that building, which is what you saw in the visualization, kind of a landmark that creates that gateway in. So what might happen with the rest of the site? Well, there's a series of options that we've looked at. One would be if we were able to put the Bergen Auto and the Ubri site together, fronting Raritan, we could add in another building that would infill at this location and really fill in the gaps. I think an important thing is that parking lots and parking in front of auto service businesses, kind of a dark hole on the avenue, would go away and be sort of seen back to life with vitality. Now, there's also a vacant lot behind this and then a garage down below on Denison that's associated with the apartments. So if we were to add in a little more property behind, this building could extend and actually then become a C-shaped building framing a courtyard to the rear. And if it were to go one step further and we were to bring the land where the garage is located into play, that building might even have beneath grade parking accessed from the rear from Denison Street. We're also showing a potential driveway connection that could occur from the Classic Cleaners property onto Denison Street in between, and something could absorb Classic Cleaners in at some point, potentially in the future. So there's a series of options associated with this site because it's multiple parcels, multiple ownership, but we are able to think about this in terms of assemblage, which really is a way to sort of unpack the value and the potential of these sites here. So next, if we can step across the street. So the last 2 lots between Mary's Restaurant and the Sunoco site is the building that you see on the right, 13134. It's these 2 residential buildings today. There's deep lots. They back up to an alley that you can see a thin little stem that's labeled that comes off of Park Place. And we've had some neighborhood meetings related to this. It's a bit of a challenge. There's been proposals in the past to redevelop this site and provide for parking at the rear that would be accessed from Park Place via this alley into the parking lot. And in one of our neighborhood meetings last year, there was some dialogue and neighbors and with the prospective developers to basically explore perhaps eliminating parking if we had another place to park it. So back to that multi-level parking structure over on Track D up at North 3rd and Denison Street. That's the key. It basically allows us to think differently about a site like this, eliminate really what was going to be a challenge of access coming down Park Place, wrapping down a 9-foot wide alley with 2-way traffic to access the rear. And so what's proposed now in this concept planning is a small ground floor commercial space on Raritan, about 4,000 square feet. Again, that's our whole notion of sort of right sizing the amount of non-residential, enough to activate the street front, lobby entrance to the apartments above. And then in the rear, there would actually be a combination of a residence courtyard and a small little publicly accessible parklet. The rear right now, there you can see that 9-foot alley that comes behind the auto service building from Park Place on the upper photo. The bottom right is the rear of this property. Again, looking down the alley in the rear yard. And so the idea is that we'd have this combination space that worked both as a outdoor space for the residents where they might grill and eat out. And there would be a trash enclosure. So there is sort of one essential function that needs to occur. Other than that, there's a little parklet in the remaining space that would be publicly accessible. Probably really one of those secret little public spaces for the residents of the neighborhood. And then a walkway that connects Raritan back up to the alley in Park Place. Okay. So that really brings us to our overview of the vision for all of our sites, as well as a little more detail on what's proposed for tracks A and B. Terry, am I passing back?
Okay, I think that's great, and I just would mention. So now, I guess, Mayor, I think that ends. I will mention again, if there are comments. I know we're focusing on tracks A and B as identified on this map, but if folks have comments, we have some more slides later on after we have a chance to talk about this a bit. But Mayor, with that, I guess it's your show.
Okay. And so we're about to enter our public comment and question period. Want to remind you that everything is being recorded. We're going to go to the same format we use with council meetings. So there'll be 3 minutes per question allotted in order to allow as many people as possible to ask their questions. And you're going to be asking the questions the way that we have been doing it on council meetings, by either raising your hand by pressing *9 or on your phone, or using the raise hand option on the Zoom. I'm going to ask for comments specifically about tracks A and B first, because the folks that were invited to this particular session are those that would be most affected by that area. And then if you have questions about any of the other areas, we'll ask you to come up and ask those questions. Terry, if you could call on people and either call them on them by name or the last 4 digits of their phone number, and then I'll be able to refer the questions to the right person who can answer them.
Sounds good. And I'll do my best to time, and usually I have the clerks help with some of this mechanics, but we're not overrun with hands, so I think we'll make it just fine. Okay. The first hand that was raised, and again, we're focused on track AB for now. However, if we get through people's questions, we'll open it up more broadly for sure. David Sandler, I've unmuted you. Can you state your name just so we know it's in fact you and where you live? It looks like you may need to unmute yourself as well.
You hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, David Sandler from Highland Montgomery Apartments.
Oh, hi.
Hi. I don't know if you know Michael Zucker. I work with Michael Zucker.
I don't know him personally, but I'm really glad you guys are participating, because you back right into this. So
yeah. So first of all, we really do appreciate everyone working to redevelop the town and make the downtown stand out and look nice, and obviously as nice as the nicer the town looks, the better it is for everyone. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. One, comment, which I hope that you keep in mind as you're going through this is, our property at Highland Montgomery, is, the low point of the area. And we've always had somewhat of a drainage issue. And as there's been development, more and more water has been diverted to our property and has caused us a lot of headaches. And we had to, rebuild some of our garages, and we've had quite a few floods going into boiler rooms, so I just want to mention that as an issue, or something that has cropped up from the development, and that is something that there should be a focus on when these tracts are being developed, is drainage, making sure that whether it's on these tracts or adding drainage, onto Denison Street or onto, New Brunswick Avenue, that, addressing these issues and concerns when we are developing these tracts.
So Jim, I don't know if you want to address that as the planner, or Terry, with your experience with these issues.
That's a point. Well, I'll speak up since I saw Jim was muted. It's a point well taken, and it's, the topography there is, you're absolutely right. You're at the low point there, but there are also some really cool new and emerging best management practices around stormwater management, and the DEP is actually pushing municipalities very hard in this direction right now. I know we're already looking at it, and we could certainly look at incorporating. What's the advantage of some of these practices? They're also green infrastructure, meaning they add more green. They have other environmental benefits besides just water management. So, but I think, you know, it's a point very well taken, and that we will not forget to make sure that gets addressed in some way as we pull together the pieces of the plan. Just know that the plan is at a certain level of detail. Probably not, we're not going to get into engineering drainage to that level of detail in the plan, but we can surely call it out as an issue that needs to be addressed in any forthcoming development.
Right. You know, that's why I'm bringing it up now, you know, during the beginning stages, that as you know, we move along, that it's something that could be
100%.
Taken into account. And, you know, it's something that we will be looking at, you know, that, you know, we hope is addressed when these tracks are developed. Just a quick question. These, you know, houses, you know, the housing that you're building is all being affordable housing?
No, we would be doing inclusionary, which is a percentage of the total number of units. This is something we've put into an ordinance. This is a policy we're following on all our projects moving forward. So depending on the type of unit, meaning rental or for sale, there might be a different percentage of inclusionary. I believe if it's rental, it's 15%. If it's for sale units, 20. I think in general, we're thinking rental is likely where the market's going to be, but we don't know for sure at this
That
point.
was my next question. I guess that was my answer as well.
Yeah, I don't have an answer there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mary, is there another hand up?
Yes, sorry, I was taking notes. Hold on one second. Next person I see, Esther Reed. I'm going to unmute you. If you could just state your name and where you live.
Hi, Esther Reed. I live on North 2nd Avenue. Thank you so much for putting together this presentation. It's very exciting to see this potential redevelopment. I have 3 super quick questions. The first is, you mentioned as part of the presentation in Tract A that the service stations or car fix-it lots are owned by the city. And so I want to know if the borough owns the other properties or if it's being taken by eminent domain, or what the arrangement is for that. That's my first question. My second question, I didn't hear any discussion about the Sunoco station at the corner of South 2nd and Raritan. So I'm curious to hear why that isn't part of this redevelopment plan. And lastly, there is a pedestrian walkway between Bergen Auto and the building to the left. Thank you for this picture, it really helps. And for years and years and years and years, I've complained to officials with the borough that it's not well lit. I frequently walk there at night, especially in the winter where it's full of ice. And I want to put in a request, if there's going to be work done there, that the lighting is very good. And also in the meantime, I just want some advice and guidance on who else I could talk to at the borough about getting that fixed once and for all. Thank you.
Okay, so the properties that are owned by the borough right now are the Bergen Auto property. Jim, can you highlight that?
Yep.
Right there on the left.
The leftmost property next to the pedestrian walkway that was just referenced.
And I don't know if Joe is still on, but we
Yeah.
are talking with owners of other properties in the area.
So,
Joe,
Mayor,
do you want to comment on that or not?
sure, Mayor. So as you described, we own the Bergen Auto property. We have an ongoing dialogue with the Ubris through their attorney, but the Ubris own that property. Classic Cleaners, we also have an ongoing dialogue. Borough actually assisted with some investigations of the environmental status of that property. And so we have an ongoing dialogue with that property's owner's attorney as well. The Gun and Boat, we are in the final stages of the negotiation for purchase and sale agreement. We expect to sign that shortly and acquire that property. And then the 2 vacant parcels in the back, we have recently designated those as areas in need of redevelopment with condemnation powers, but we have not made a determination on whether we execute condemnation for those 2 parcels.
Okay. And then the question about the Sunoco station. Joe, do you want to take that one as well?
Sure. I mean, we are aware of the property owner. On occasion, they've reached out to us. I think it's been somewhat radio silent now for, I'd say, several months. But we do see that we are aware of that property. We're aware of the ownership. And we're pretty hopeful that at some point that property will be developed. But we did not include it here because we focused on those parcels that we think were achievable in the short term, where we had either dialogue with property owners and or it was borough-owned property. So we wanted to begin with parcels that we thought we could achieve a result on. And so for now, Sunoco is one that we would hope to do something, but it's not on the immediate front burner.
And then the final question from Rabbi Reed, the pedestrian walkway. I know you have raised this before, and it is a concern. The borough administrator is on the call, and she is really the best person to address this issue moving forward. I don't know, Terry, if the property, it doesn't belong to us. So
I have to look into that, Mayor. I'm actually not even sure if it's an easement or what. So I'll have to, it's kind of one of those things that's always been there, and I'm not exactly sure how we might be able to address, but I certainly would say with future development on the site, we can address those concerns, but I would like to try to address in some way in the short run or shorter run, some of Esther's concerns, because if it's dark at night, that is a concern to me as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to add, we've also talked about the fact that, Chris, maybe you could flip to one of the plans which shows development there, that there would be windows facing that walkway on the building that might be built on Bergen Auto or extend back, and we're actually showing the walkway behind, if you go back one, between the garage and the courtyard. And we envision that, there's eyes on the walkway security, to quote Jane Jacobs, that will occur if there are folks living there. So that will also help with the safety as well as ambient lighting. And we can light it also off the building.
That's a good point, Jim. Thank you. Okay, Terry? All
right, I have what looks to be our one and only phone caller, and their phone number ends in 4445. I've unmuted you. If you could just state your name and where you live for the record. And you may need to unmute yourself if you have. There you go.
I am unmuted. Lois Lebbing, North 2nd Avenue. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi. I wonder, the last redevelopment plan promised to close most of the driveways along Raritan Avenue. Is that still in your plan?
So,
Mayor, do you mind if I just jump in?
No, go ahead.
So, yes, the hope is, I don't know, I will let Jim unmute himself and pipe in more specifically, but that is a major pedestrian safety priority throughout our downtown, frankly, but certainly as we redevelop, we want to close as many of those driveways as we can. Jim, maybe you could speak more specifically to the gateway site, as we're calling it.
Sure, and we may go to slide 33 in a second, but before we do, Chris, we just go back 1 second. If we, one of the findings we had in our area in need of redevelopment for Gun and Boat is that whole, what you see labeled to the right of it, existing parking area, it's just this sort of bleeding parking lot where cars can back up or drive in over the sidewalk, very unsafe. We're closing up the parking lot, by the way, to the right of that, to the right of the red line on the new building that's coming in. So that parking lot has disappeared. Parking lots to the right of Gun and Boat would disappear. And then if we skip down to Ubre's and Bergen Auto, the entirety is parking with, I believe there's 4 different driveways just in that stretch. So we would be basically eliminating half a dozen of the existing driveways. And now we can go forward and filling that in with a pedestrian-friendly streetscape. If the cleaners were to be assembled or absorbed into some sort of a future phase, that might close an additional driveway, or there could be just one driveway left that might help service some of the redevelopment, as you see here, by connecting to Denison. We would envision that would be an ingress-only type condition. So we're eliminating a huge streetscape of driveways.
Thank you.
And Lois, our Complete Streets plan is really a driving force for a lot of development and activity throughout town. And that includes safe walking and bicycling.
And wheelchairs?
And wheelchairs.
I hope so. Thank you. Okay, if anyone takes the time to look at the borough tax map, sometime back in the 1980s or 90s, this subject came up about who owns the pedestrian staircase to the apartments because it was broken and handrails were missing. And then you can see it is the apartment property. Okay. But will that be eliminated doing any of this, like at that if the garages go phase 2C?
Jim?
The walkway we envision remaining but improving it in terms of lighting, visibility, safety.
Good. Okay, and so then, well, if there's going to be more traffic on Denison, how will that work? Will it be no parking on this dead end of Denison so that there is an easier flow of ingoing and outgoing to North 2nd from this complex?
I think that really remains on any specific plan. It could be if we reverse 1 or 2 slides, Chris. It's likely if something like this occurred within our development's alternatives that there would be no parking on Denison. So while there may be, for instance, some sort of a resident access drop off to the proposed mixed use building on the right, the Gun and Boat, effectively these residents would be parking in the multi-level parking structure 2 blocks up Denison at North 3rd.
Right. I don't think that's going to happen, especially in the winter. And the nice building where the international market was that Anton has, I guess, completed, those apartments are certainly not filled yet, and I don't think downstairs is yet either. I wonder, unlike the last redevelopment plan, I saw the ordinance, and I believe this plan is using tax dollars, and the other one said it absolutely would not use tax dollars, so that's where this money has come from to buy these properties?
I don't know which other redevelopment plan you're referring to. Terry, do you?
I'm not familiar with that. I mean, we do have, we did get authorization from council. We have capital ordinance. I don't know if Joe wants to weigh in on the funding.
Yeah, Steve Nolan and during many meetings talked about that no tax dollars would be used under Merrill's redevelopment plan, roughly about, I have an autographed copy, 2005 or 9 or something, I guess earlier.
2005 was the downtown one, I believe.
So,
but Joe?
Yeah, so the borough did make a decision to, in order to jumpstart redevelopment, to acquire certain parcels, as we described. One is already acquired, one's under contract. The plan is to acquire the parcels, and when they're consolidated together, a single parcel consolidated with other parcels, they become more valuable, and they would then be put back into the marketplace through a competitive process. So this was a way for the borough to become more involved in redevelopment, which has clearly become necessary because nothing was happening for decades, with the goal of acquiring parcels, consolidating them, and then putting them out into the market in a competitive process to maximize the price, with the expectation that we would get some, if not all, or most of our money back, if not more.
Mayor, I think we've, last one, Lois, I think we've more than exceeded the 3 minutes at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
We can come back around. Next up, Joy Watkins Hume. You are now unmuted. Just say your name and address, please, or your.
Hi, it's actually Neil Hume.
Oh, Neil. You sound very different.
Yeah.
Hi, Neil.
Address 111 Park Place. So I just had a question that was touched on briefly there in that last question. With the lot on 130, 134, which backs onto Park Place. And if they have parking available in the multi-use parking deck, how is that going to happen? As in, the easiest option right now would just park on Park Place or South First, or even right on Raritan in front of the building. What's the plan to not have all the local or the other streets parking being permanently occupied by those residents?
All right, Joe or Jim, which one of you would like to take this?
Let me take this, Mayor. So one of the benefits of the redevelopment process is that with each of the property owners, and this property owner, for example, will enter into redevelopment agreements, and we'll enter into contracts in which we can negotiate things like you'll have to use the garage, or where interim parking will be made, or if there's going to be a payment in lieu of parking to help fund a parking facility. So we will, as a part of the redevelopment process, negotiate redevelopment agreements with each of the property owners. And as a part of that negotiation, we will account for things like parking, how it's paid for, where it happens.
And I think he was also getting at kind of some of the impacts potentially locally on the neighborhoods, if I'm not mistaken. And so I would add, and Jim, maybe you could chime in, but we have been exploring how we might implement some neighborhood permit only type parking solutions down the line as one approach to help manage that. But Jim, I don't know what your other thoughts might be on that.
Yeah, no, and I think in addition to that, again, we can have very specific requirements that would be part of the ultimate leases of those apartments. So basically the International Market pop-off building, as it's been referred to across the street, that building will have its residents parked within 1,000 feet. So we're heading in that direction. I mean, the one, I guess, big advantage that is back to the kind of maybe the culture in Highland Park is that will tend to attract residents who are not multi-car, drive everywhere households. There's lots of places for them to live in Middlesex County, but in the downtown, there's a big impact. So folks that maybe are one car or no car households would be very attracted to this situation, and people that don't use their car every day would be attractive. I know I've lived in downtown settings where my car was a couple blocks away in a public facility. If you don't use it every day, it's not an issue.
I'm glad you brought up the international shop, Jim, because that's a good example of the first project that we ever put through where parking, not having parking on premises was part of the deal agreement, so to speak. Okay, anybody else?
Could I just follow up that? Do you mind? Because the main worry is not so much what their agreement is. There can be an agreement, but with open parking everywhere, anyone can park on any spot. And we already have Park Place is a very small street, but we already have quite a lot of overflow parking from people who live on South First, who park on Park Place. And so this seems to provide another location where we could end up with even more cars and parking problems on Park Place.
So that's something to be cognizant of, Terry and Jim, as we move forward.
And that, Mayor, did come up, and Neil, it came up loud and clear when we met with the neighbors a year ago or so. So we're going to have to craft something that strikes a balance.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and I could just add, I think one of the comments from the neighbors when they asked the question, well, could parking be eliminated so we don't have this issue, is that if there's a parking lot behind that building at 130, 134, access from Park Place and then this 9-foot alley, it means that there will be increased traffic, which we should be able to eliminate. But that traffic and that access point also would just induce the on-street parking problem that you fear, would become exacerbated on Park Place. And I've been there, I absolutely know what you're referring to. So we're sensitive to that. Thank you.
Next up is Rob Rothowitz. Just say your name so we know we can hear you.
Hi, this is Robert Savage. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'm on Magnolia Street. And I mean, my first question would be, if we're looking at doing any sort of parking deck on tract D, what exactly kind of parking deck are we looking at in phase 1 in tract A or in tract C? You know, if we, you know, going back to the last question, if we're going to have negotiated parking rights, do we really know that phase 1 is going to be built before tract D? You know, or, you know, how is this going to be ordered so that we know that tract B, if it's built, there's actually a parking deck in place somewhere else for this negotiated parking? And why would we put a parking deck at all anywhere in town when parking decks generally have a short lifespan and then they get developed out and replaced by something else? And what would a parking deck facilitate next to a redeveloped restaurant and whatever else would replace the bridge? It just seems to be the least likely place to put a deck. And overall, I'm opposed to having a parking deck anywhere in town.
All right, who wants to take this question, Jim or Terry?
I'll take a first stab if you don't mind. I guess one of the challenges, you know, in unlocking some of the development potential on these parcels, if we don't provide parking centralized, is you have to force some parking on site. I mean, unless you're suggesting just don't have any parking for any new development, which we could talk about separately. But so our thinking was centralizing it would make the opportunity to do better scale, better design buildings rather than trying to also shoehorn parking on the same site. Jim, I don't know what else you would add.
Let me try and take a stab at it too, Terry.
Yeah.
So we have to begin with the, I think it was stated at the top of the meeting, our goal is to increase the amount of wallets in the downtown. So we want to overall increase the density in the downtown. One of the things that is clear is that and do that in a responsible way, meaning not incredibly tall, giant, overgrown buildings throughout the downtown. So the challenge in order to do that is how do you allow a site to have increased density and manage the parking at the same time? You can't, because these are small, relatively not large projects. The way to do that is to centralize the parking, which allows you to maximize the density on the site without it being too overwhelming, which increases the number of wallets and people in the downtown. So the concept behind a centralized parking deck is it allows for more development, more reasonable planned development as opposed to overwhelming development throughout the downtown by centralizing parking and driving everybody to that centralized parking. Your question in terms of how do we phase that in is a great question that we debated and talked about a lot, and it will be an evolving answer. But by and large, we'll have to come up with temporary parking solutions along the way to accommodate. So our agreements will have to account for a temporary parking solution and then a permanent parking solution once the facility's built. But the deck is sort of fundamental to how do you maximize density on a site in a careful, thoughtful way that doesn't overwhelm the site with a gigantic building because you got to park the cars there as well, with the goal of putting more wallets, people in the downtown to drive economic development.
Thank
So
you.
at this point, there's no discussion about if tract D doesn't happen, there's no discussion about having a parking deck within phase 1 or the tract C development. So that's something I don't need to worry about in other areas.
No, I think the best way to think of this is right now we're trying to plan for we're starting off with this big piece of marble and we're going to work our way down to a piece of art. And the big piece of marble is the envelope that we're talking about today. And that's going to have uses. And I think some of this plan may have some on-site parking permitted, although the goal would not to have that happen. But we start off with the envelope of the marble, and that's all we're doing now. As we go through the process, have dialogue with the property owners, the location for the deck becomes more realistic. Hopefully all the trains begin to come into the station at the same time. So at this point, I think we want to think about all the possibilities, be as flexible as possible in our planning, without compromising our core principles of not being too large, and also working with the blocks that we can work with, which were ones that either we own or that we can control, in order to get a result that's, within a reasonable amount of time.
And then have there been any shade studies done on looking at 4- and 5-story buildings on the south side of Raritan Avenue?
It's going for you, Jim.
Jim?
Yeah, on the south side there, you're saying shade from the north. You're saying from the south side onto Raritan.
That's correct.
We haven't gotten into shade studies, but we
Okay.
are. But
Yeah, I know.
One thing we have adhered to is at least the concept in the existing redevelopment plan, which allows for 3 stories with a 4th story pushback at the street. And so we have envisioned that at least that 5th level, you can sort of see there's 2 lines there along Raritan. The one that's closest to the street would be the 4-story portion. And then the second line behind it would be where the 5th story would go up. And if we go back to the rendering, you can see that. So we've attempted to sort of wedding cake tier them back, which will help with some shadow reduction.
Okay, thank you very much. I think my last comment, just to cap out my 3 minutes, would be, going back to Matt Hale's comment earlier about not having a car-centric approach. I think even though we want to be able to do something with the parking, I would like to avoid having a centralized deck anywhere within the town. It just seems like a parking deck, looking at New Brunswick, where they built decks, had them for 15, 20 years, and then removed the decks and replaced it with other development. I just don't see the parking deck as being beneficial to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Terry, any more hands?
Yeah, we have a couple more. Hold on 1 second while I manage things. I've got Christine Lutz. I've unmuted you. Now you unmute yourself and say your name.
Okay, thanks, Terry. Christine Lutz, I'm at 119 Park Place. So I'm concerned about the Tract B in particular. I guess just to echo what Neil said about the parking, which is already a big issue on Park Place. We've got numerous houses where they don't have driveways. So the residents only parking is parking on the street, preferably in front of their house. So that's, one thing, and Neil kind of covered that. But the other thing is that Park Place is a dead end, or at least theoretically it's a dead end. We get lots of traffic speeding down here, not noticing that it's a dead end, turning around at the end, speeding back out of the street. And we also just get a lot of traffic for a tiny, again, theoretically dead end street. And so I think there's a concern that this is only going to increase too, if Park Place is the only egress to the new building. So that's been an ongoing concern with us on the street. I also just have a lot of questions about that part of the street that goes down to what you're calling the alley. There are 2 houses that face that leads down into the car shop. And if that's actually a street, or if it's kind of over the years developed into being part of Park Place, and should cars really be going down there? I don't know. I haven't really looked into the history of it or talked to my neighbors who have been here a long time. I think I was one of the neighbors who stood outside late that night and talked to Jim and the developers. And I think we did talk about, again, potentially, maybe being able to block off that part of the street. And that would tie to having, no parking behind the building and having that pocket park. We talked about all that. So I guess I just wanted to, voice my concerns too, but also kind of asking for maybe an update or any views or new views on the situation and where it stands with the potential pocket park and maybe actually being able to cut off Park Place as part of this process.
Before you answer that, Terry, I don't want to forget to ask you this. Would you get a hold of Lieutenant Satchow to do a better job of denoting that street as a dead end? So perhaps we'd avoid some of the people that Christine was just talking about who zoomed down the street and then turn around.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. And I didn't want to lose Jim. I just want to make sure you caught her earlier because there's a couple packed up points, but
Yes.
the issue about the egress in and out of the site, I just want to make sure you address that. I figured you would.
But so, and Christine, thank you for you and Rob and other neighbors for hanging out and envisioning a little bit in the dark that night when we sort of came up with the concept that we're showing here. So there would be no resident vehicular access to the rear of this building under this proposal that you see on the screen here. The only vehicular access to the rear of the building would be their trash collection. So effectively, we could look at Park Place either all the way back or at the beginning of the T or along the front of those two homes, as we discussed that night with the neighbors, to address the very concerns you have. So one, with no resident vehicular access there, the building really gets its front door on Raritan and has, let's say, guests that would be coming would park on Raritan. Its address is on Raritan. The residents themselves would be parking a block and a half away up at the parking structure and walking up and down Raritan and coming in through the Raritan front door. So there's a whole reorientation of the building that to me is the most direct addressing of the concerns that all of the Park Place neighbors had. So our vision also is then that the alley gets repaved in a way that feels a little bit more like it's a kind of a shared space walkway getting to the little pocket park, which is envisioned for a portion of the rear yard space. The building developer would like to have a portion as a residence only outdoor area where they can have a barbecue grill and some dining. We've tried to envision it something more than just a fence that says public-private, that actually there's a way to blend the two spaces together that gives more enjoyment for the residents of the building in their rear yard, but also kind of makes the public park space, which we do need to come back to the neighbors and get a little more input on, kind of a central feature, as I said, sort of a secret garden around the corner there. So I don't know if Terry, I addressed, I think
you did. I guess I just wanted to make sure it was clear that the intent is to orient to Raritan and that this rear entry is really just a utility for the trash enclosure and that the residents would access the backyard from their building. But the point is well taken regarding parking and the speeding concerns, and we'll chew on that a little more.
Yeah, can I just say, thanks Terry, and thanks to the mayor. I appreciate that. I think a lot of people come down Park Place just thinking it's a cut through, or they think it's Magnolia. They really do not see the dead end signs at the end of our street. So again, I do appreciate taking a look at that.
Yeah. All right, we have a couple more hands. Looks like, hold on one second. Carl Prey, who I suspect may be Mary, but I'm going to allow you to talk and you tell me.
Hi, yeah, this is.
Oh, it is Carl. It's not Mary.
That's right. Mary is right next to me.
Okay, good.
Making sure that I say the right thing. I guess that I want to come back to this question of finance because I don't know, the lawyer was saying that, yes, we're going to buy stuff. I presume that's with our tax dollars is going to be buying this stuff. And then he hopes in the future we'll be able to sell it and make the money back. And I'm just wondering if Highland Park has any recent history of buying property and then selling it back and making money, because our experience across the street from us,
Jim Polo's.
yeah, Jim Polo's, Dennison Street is the borough bought properties to make a, yeah, you know, for, I don't know, $500,000 to them
150.
for to build parking. And then they waited for 10 years, didn't build anything, and then sold it back for half that. So the borough lost about $250,000 in tax revenue.
To the mayor, Jim Polo's.
To Jim Polo's.
Who now owns the entire Tract D.
Yep. And then the other question is, okay, some of this is going to be for commercial development, but who's actually going to pay for this parking deck? Is that going to be some commercial group who's going to want to build a parking deck in Highland Park? Seems a bit unlikely. And it seems likely that's going to be more money from our taxpayer dollars, I guess.
So, so there's a lot packed up in those questions there. Let me just address one thing, and that is, I don't know what happened back in the days that you were referring to. However, there has been a trend in recent years of municipalities very successfully purchasing properties that were not in great shape, and then repackaging them to sell to developers for future development. And so that was what the governing body was looking at when they did pass the bond ordinance of several years ago to start doing this. As far as the parking and how we see it being used, or the deck, I don't know if Joe is still on.
He came back.
Sure. I'm here, Mayor. So
Okay.
our goal is to limit the impact to the taxpayers. We believe that at the end of the day, this will be a positive for the taxpayers for lots of reasons. Generally jumpstarting economic development in Highland Park. But the way we hope to pay for these, the parking garage or the parking or whatever is required, is by taking advantage of things like zoning changes to pieces of property. So for example, parcel, we're calling our tract B, that property owner would need a increase in zoning to do what they would like to do. We would likely negotiate a payment towards a parking deck in exchange for increasing the zoning, which is permitted under the redevelopment law. That doesn't cost the taxpayers any money. And that's a way to take a project and create revenues by changing the zoning for parking. You know, there'll be, in the cases of the municipally owned property, those are tax exempt properties that would become ratables. So that creates another possible revenue stream. So we think that there's enough opportunity through the various projects to fund the parking garage and at the same time, you know, create ratables and achieve affordable housing and all the other things that we're trying to achieve. But all those things, again, are sort of pretty far down the line. What we're doing here is sort of, you have to crawl before you walk and walk before you run, trying to, you know, put together the outline of where we think the development can happen and what it could generally look like. And then as we move along, get deeper and deeper with each level into the weeds. When, for example, we put out once we acquire the parcel A property, we put that into the development community out in an RFP process where they bid on the price, tell us the design, you know, that begins to inform our decision on the garage. So this is a process that will take overall years, not weeks or months. And this is just the infancy where we're trying to really define the outer limits of the overall project, the bulk standards. Again, I used the marble example, but that's really is we're trying to identify the pieces of marble that we can then go from there to develop projects that we can be proud of.
But since Track D is entirely owned by Jim Polos, who was the mayor and bought some of that property while he was mayor from the borough, how are we going to prevent that kind of fiasco, which is what it was? The town lost a lot of money on that. How are we going to prevent that kind of fiasco from happening again? I am really very uncomfortable with this sitting. I mean, is Jim Polos going to be the developer of that?
Presumably he would be the developer of his own property.
He owns all of Track D.
Then we would have to, yes, and so we'd have to negotiate a redevelopment agreement with him for the development of his property. Yes. Just like we're going to have.
I think that's really, really frightening for taxpayers in Highland Park.
I mean, every property owner that we have to deal with, we're going to have to negotiate with. And again, I like the mayor, I'm new. I'm not familiar with whatever happened years ago. But in the case of what we're trying to accomplish here is we're acquiring parcels, then we're selling them immediately. So once we have consolidated them into a single parcel, we're going to put it back into a competitive process in the market.
Mayor, I'm sorry, Joe, were you done? I didn't mean to. I just looked at the clock. We've got about 6 minutes and we have 3 hands, but one of which I think we've heard from earlier. So maybe I could come back to that person if we have time.
Why don't we let the 2 other people speak?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Highland Park Properties, I've unmuted you. Dr. Adi.
Yes, hi, thank you very much. So I'm the owner of in phase 1, the 2 parcels right besides the gun shop. And, I've been patiently waiting to, I understand that the township has, passed an ordinance to condemn the properties and is still waiting to decide whether they want to seize them through eminent domain or not. Meanwhile, I've been patiently waiting. Nobody has tried to negotiate with me other than receiving a letter from the town stating that the township wanted to buy the properties for $50,000 for 2 separate properties, so $25,000 a property. Obviously I think that's totally unreasonable, but listening to Mr. Bowman speak and the plans for the town to package the gun shop along with my properties and then sell them on the market, to make more money. I guess what would be really simple for me is just to cooperate with you guys. You're more than welcome to bundle my properties with the gun shop, sell them on the fair market, and I'd be happy to get my pro rata share of the sale price.
Okay.
I mean, this is really not the time or the place for negotiation.
Right.
So,
well, what I'm trying to say is, Mr. Baumann, you said I've been radio silent for the last several months. That's totally false because you have made no attempt to reach out to me, even though I joined the last redevelopment agency meeting, and despite voicing my concerns there, you shared, nobody reached out to me. So I think the appropriate time is now to try to get some answers on how the town is going to go about engaging in good faith negotiations. And if the town is intending to seize the properties to sell them for more money, at least let the property owners get their fair share.
So I didn't refer to you when I said radio silent, but in any event, the property was bought for $18,000 a parcel. We offered 50% more. I don't think we need to get into any more detail on this, and we're happy to talk to you through your lawyer. Can't talk to you directly. So happy to have him call me.
Okay, well, independent of my properties, is it an option for the municipality to simply engage the property owners to bundle their properties to sell so the property owners can at least get their fair share, regardless of my situation?
Yeah, again, this is really not the forum for a negotiation.
Right, yeah, so I'm going to have to ask you to let the next person speak. And our attorney, Joe Baumann, will be happy to reach out to your attorney to discuss this further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty, I'm going to ask Janet Tappan to state your name and where you live.
Yes, I'm Janet Tappan. I live at 121 Park Place. That happens to be the final house before the T section of what you're calling Park Place. My deed shows that that is a right of way, and that I am not allowed to close over my section of that it has to be kept open as a right of way. But my bigger concern right now is you're talking about trash pickup and everything by that T section and the alley. Presently, all of the trash and the recyclables from the body shop behind are brought up and put in front of 125 Park Place for pickup because the trash collectors do not go down that right of way. So I'm very concerned with having that amount of trash from an apartment building also brought up to Park Place.
All right.
Okay, we'll take that.
Okay, thank you for that. And there's probably some ways we could address that, but I appreciate you raising it.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. Mayor, we are at 7:59 and looks like I have one other hand up from somebody who spoke previous. Do you want me to grab it?
Yeah, let's take the last person and then we'll sum up.
All right, David Sandler.
Hi, sorry for interjecting again. I just, realized afterwards that one of the parcels in the future development, the garage, does belong to Highland Montgomery Apartments. Right, that parcel right over there. Do you plan on using eminent domain to seize it in the future? Is it, are there any plans regarding it right now? What's your plan of action in regard to that property?
The property is now not subject to condemnation powers. It was included because from a planning perspective, it made sense to have it subject to a redevelopment plan. But if we made it that far in the process, there would be a dialogue with the property owner.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, then Terry, if there are no other hands.
I do not see any, Mayor.
Okay, I'm going to thank everybody who participated. Certainly, if you have additional questions after tonight, you can feel free to contact the borough administrator. Sorry, Terry, I didn't warn you about that.
No, I'm on the flyer. I'm already out there.
Okay, so that we're sure that any questions that come up don't go unanswered.
Yeah, as you digest this, I would ask you to think about, I'm sure other ideas or questions will come up. I'm happy to try to field them or at least add them into the hopper for our planning team to think about. And I also, if I didn't email you before this meeting, it probably means I don't have an email for you. And even if you just want to drop me a quick email saying, for future reference, here's my email address, because I do like to send little reminders before meetings and things. We can only do snail mail so much, but I'm happy to start a list of interested folks around the downtown redevelopment planning effort. If you could just drop me an email to tjover@hpboro.com, and I'll add you to the list, and we'll just keep you apprised when we're sending out a notification.
And I just want to say before we all sign off, how exciting this really is for our town. It's been a long time coming. And I want to thank Jim Constantine and Chris and Joe Bauman for working so closely with our borough administrator, who's also our redevelopment guru, in pulling all of this together. You all have done a phenomenal job. And I'm thrilled that we're finally at a point where we can start looking at future economic development for our community. Thank you and good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.